Some betrayals are quiet whispers in the dark. Others happen under the blinding glare of 1,000 spotlights. For Jessica Peterson, it was the latter. 7 months pregnant and beaming with pride, she watched her husband, the man she'd sacrificed everything for, step onto a stage to accept the biggest award of his life. But he didn't thank her. Instead, he pulled another woman into the spotlight, calling her his muse, his everything, as the cameras flashed and the audience roared. He laughed, looking right at Jessica, as her world didn't just break it, detonated for the entire world to see. This isn't just a story of heartbreak. It's the story of what happens when a woman left with nothing but shattered pieces and the baby growing inside her decides to rebuild herself, not into a survivor, but into an empress. The Grand Royale Theatre was a sea of shimmering gowns and perfectly tailored tuxedos. The air, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and nervous ambition, buzzed with the energy of the annual Golden Iris Film Awards. For Jessica Peterson, it felt like the culmination of a decade of shared dreams. She sat at a prime table near the stage, her hand resting protectively over the gentle swell of her 7-month pregnancy bump. The baby, a boy they'd already decided to name Noah, was a quiet, constant reassurance beneath the soft silk of her emerald gown. Her husband, Daniel Carter, was the man of the hour. His indie film, Echoes of a City, was the sleeper hit of the year, and he was the frontrunner for Best Director. Jessica's heart swelled with a pride that was almost painful. She remembered the lean years, the tiny apartment with peeling paint, the countless bowls of ramen noodles, the part-time jobs she'd worked to support them, while he poured his soul into his scripts. She had been his first reader, his harshest critic, his most fervent believer. She'd typed his final drafts, brewed his coffee at 3 a.m., and whispered words of encouragement when his confidence faltered. His success felt as much hers as it did his. "You look beautiful, Jess," Daniel had said earlier that evening. His eyes, however, seemed to skim over her, already focused on the stage, the cameras, the promise of glory. He was electric, a live wire of anticipation, and she'd chalked up his distance to pre-show jitters. Now the moment was here. The presenter, a seasoned A-list actor, tore open the envelope. And the Golden Iris for Best Director goes to Daniel Carter for Echoes of a City. The room erupted. Jessica gasped, tears instantly welling in her eyes. This was it, everything they had worked for. Daniel shot up from his seat, a triumphant roar escaping his lips. He kissed her a quick, almost forgettable peck on the cheek before striding towards the stage, soaking in the thunderous applause. Jessica watched her hands clasp together, her entire being focused on him. He was handsome, impossibly so, under the brilliant white spotlights. He took the heavy golden statuette, a wide, charismatic grin plastered on his face. "Whoa," he began, his voice smooth and confident. "Just, wow, I am speechless." He paused for effect, letting the applause wash over him again. They say no man is an island, and that has never been truer than tonight. A project like this isn't born from one person. It's born from passion, from inspiration, from a fire that someone else lights inside you. Jessica's smile widened. She braced herself for her name, for the public acknowledgement of her sacrifice and love. Daniel scanned the audience, and his eyes seemed to look right past her. "There is one person I need to thank. Someone who came into my life like a comet and showed me what true art, what true passion really is. She's the soul of this film. My muse, my inspiration, my everything." Jessica's brow furrowed in confusion. A muse, he'd always said she was his muse. Daniel's gaze locked onto a table a few rows back. "Tiffany, darling, get up here." A stunned silence rippled through the immediate vicinity before being swallowed by the general din. Jessica's head whipped around. She saw a woman rise from her seat, Tiffany Monroe, the film's lead actress. She was a vision in a skin-tight crimson dress, her platinum blonde hair styled in perfect waves. A slow, triumphant smile spread across her face as she glided towards the stage, every step a calculated performance. Jessica's blood ran cold. Tiffany, the actress Daniel had sworn was just a colleague, the late-night editing sessions and the unexplained credit card charges suddenly coalesced into a monstrous, undeniable truth. The air was sucked from her lungs. Daniel didn't just invite Tiffany onto the stage. He pulled her into his arms, dipping her into a dramatic movie-style kiss as the cameras flashed relentlessly. The crowd assuming this was part of the show, a confirmation of a hot new industry romance, began to whoop and cheer. But Daniel wasn't finished. With Tiffany on his arm, he looked out into the audience, his eyes finally finding Jessica's. There was no apology in his gaze, no regret. There was only a cold, dismissive smirk. He leaned into the microphone, his voice dripping with a casual cruelty that sliced her open. "To my muse, Tiffany," he said, raising the award. "And to new beginnings." He didn't need to say the rest. The message was clear. The entire room, or at least those close enough to see her, turned to look at the very pregnant, very publicly discarded wife. The whispers started a venomous hiss that slithered through the applause. The pitying stares felt like physical blows. Her emerald dress, once a symbol of hope, now felt like a shroud of humiliation. The baby inside her gave a small, nervous flutter, as if he could sense his mother's world imploding. Her face was a frozen mask of shock, but inside, a silent scream was tearing her apart. Time seemed to warp and stretch. The walk from the table to the exit was the longest journey of her life. Each step was a monumental effort, her legs trembling, her vision blurred by unshed tears. She could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes tracking her, the pregnant wife, the fool, the discarded relic of his past. The laughter and applause from the auditorium sounded mocking, a cruel soundtrack to her utter devastation. She stumbled out into the cool night air, the chaotic noise of the Los Angeles streets, a stark contrast to the suffocating silence in her heart. She hailed a taxi, her voice a broken whisper. As the car pulled away from the curb, she glanced back at the theater, its glittering facade now looking like the entrance to a nightmare. She arrived back at their shared house. His house now, she supposed. It felt alien, contaminated. His clothes were in the closet, his scent on the pillows. She moved through the rooms in a daze, a ghost in her own life. There was no grand scene, no dramatic packing of bags. She simply took her purse, the worn leather wallet containing the last $47 to her name, and her car keys. She didn't take the clothes Daniel had bought her, or the jewelry, or the photos of them smiling. They were all props from a life that had been a lie. Driving away from the house, with no destination in mind, the full weight of her situation crashed down on her. She was 28 years old, 7 months pregnant, homeless and utterly alone. The man she had built her world around had not just left her. He had gleefully demolished her on a public stage, laughing as the walls caved in. The tears finally came hot, silent trails of betrayal and despair as she drove into the endless, unforgiving night. The first few weeks were a blur of cheap motels and crushing despair. The $47 vanished in 2 days on gas and a stale sandwich. Jessica sold her car, a modest sedan they'd bought together, for a pittance. That money, a few $1,000s, became her lifeline, a dwindling buffer against the harsh reality of the streets. She found a room in a boarding house in a forgotten part of the city, where the walls were paper-thin and the permanent smell of boiled cabbage hung in the air. The shame was a constant, suffocating companion. Every time she saw a newspaper or a magazine at a checkout stand, she'd see their faces, Daniel Carter and Tiffany Monroe. Hollywood's new golden couple, smiling, kissing, celebrating. The articles painted him as a genius, a passionate artist swept up in an epic romance. They never mentioned the pregnant wife he'd left in the wreckage. To the world, she had been erased. Loneliness was a physical ache. She had alienated some of her own friends over the years, prioritizing Daniel's career over her own relationships. Her parents were gone lost in a car accident 5 years prior. She had no one. The baby was her only reason to get out of bed in the morning. She would talk to him, her hands cradling her belly, promising him a better life, a promise that felt more like a desperate prayer with each passing day. She tried to find work, but who wanted to hire a heavily pregnant woman with no recent job experience for a short-term gig? The interviews were a series of polite rejections and thinly veiled pity. Her savings dwindled with terrifying speed. One evening, after paying the weekly rent for her dismal room, she counted the remaining cash. $89. $89 to last until the baby came and beyond. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She sat on the lumpy mattress, the bare bulb overhead, casting harsh shadows on the peeling wallpaper. This was it. This was rock bottom. The despair was so profound, it felt like drowning. She thought about giving up, about the darkness that promised an end to the pain. But then a tiny, insistent kick from within her womb. A flutter of life. Noah. He was real and he was depending on her. She couldn't fail him. Her mind, frantic for a solution, began to race through the tattered remnants of her old life. There had to be someone, something. And then a name surfaced from the depths of her memory, a name she hadn't thought of in years, Alistair Finch. Mr. Finch had been her father's best friend in college, a brilliant but reclusive man who had made a fortune in the early days of tech. After her parents' death, he had sent a brief, formal condolence letter with a business card attached. If you ever find yourself in true need, the handwritten note had said, "Use this number." Your father was a good man. At the time, grieving and trying to build a life with Daniel, she had tucked the card away and forgotten about it. It was a long shot, a desperate, humiliating plea to a near stranger. But it was the only shot she had. Her hands trembled as she pulled the worn card from the bottom of her purse. The number was for a private line. Taking a deep breath that shuddered through her entire body, she dialed. An automated, impersonal voice answered. "Finch Holdings. Please state your name and purpose." "My name is Jessica Peterson," she stammered, her voice hoarse. "My father was Robert Peterson. Mr. Finch. He told me to call if I was ever in need." She expected to be dismissed, to be told he was unavailable. She waited, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. After a silence that stretched for an eternity, a new voice came on the line. It was deep calm and carried an air of quiet authority. "Jessica, this is Alistair Finch. I was sorry to hear about your father. Tell me, what kind of need are we talking about?" The simple, direct question broke through her carefully constructed composure. The story came pouring out, the humiliation at the awards, the betrayal, the pregnancy, the motel rooms, the $89. She didn't cry. Her voice was flat, detached, as if she were recounting a story about someone else. The sheer act of telling someone, of admitting the totality of her failure, was both agonizing and strangely liberating. When she finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. She braced for pity, or worse, a polite refusal. "Your father," Alistair said, finally, his voice softer now, "was the most resilient man I ever knew. He once told me you had the same core of steel in you. It seems you've just forgotten where you put it. He didn't offer charity. He offered a challenge. I live in Seattle now, he said. I have a guest house on my property. It's empty. You can stay there, have your baby get back on your feet. There are no strings attached. However, he paused. I also have a proposition. I see potential in people. It's how I made my fortune. I am willing to invest in you, Jessica. Not with a handout, but with an opportunity. I will fund your education, a new life, anything you need. In return, you will work for me. You will learn my business, and you will apply that brilliant mind your father always bragged about. You will pay me back, not with money, but with success. Jessica was stunned into silence. She had been expecting a $100 wire transfer, not a complete restructuring of her life. Why, she whispered, why would you do this for me? Because your father once did the same for me, Alistair replied simply. He gave me a loan to start my first company when no one else would. He believed in me. I am merely settling a debt. The choice is yours. A plane ticket to Seattle will be waiting for you at LAX tomorrow morning, under your name. It's flight 732, departing at 10 a.m. Be on it or don't. Either way, I wish you well. The line clicked dead. Jessica stared at the phone, the offer hanging in the stale air of the room. It was terrifying. Seattle, a new city, a new life, a debt to be repaid through success she couldn't even imagine. But it was also a hand reaching down into the abyss she was drowning in. It was a lifeline. That night she didn't sleep. She sat by the window watching the city lights, feeling the gentle rhythmic movements of her son. For the first time in months, the future was not a black, terrifying void. It was a question mark. It was a chance. The next morning, with a resolve that felt foreign and new, she used her last $89 to take a taxi to the airport. She had no luggage, only the clothes on her back, and the small purse containing Alistair Finch's business card. As she walked through the terminal, she felt the weight of her old life, the shame and the heartbreak begin to recede, replaced by a tiny, fragile spark. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was something harder, something colder. It was determination. She was not just going to survive. She was going to build an empire on the ashes of her old life. Daniel Carter thought he had destroyed her. He had no idea he had just forged a weapon. The guest house on Alistair Finch's estate was larger and more luxurious than any home Jessica had ever lived in. Nestled among towering pine trees on the shore of Lake Washington, it was a sanctuary of glass and cedar, a world away from the grime and despair of her Los Angeles boarding house. Alistair, a man in his late 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a quiet demeanor, greeted her with a simple nod. He was not a man for effusive sentiment. His currency was action, not words. "The house is yours for as long as you need it," he'd said, handing her a key. "There's a car in the garage, a credit card for expenses on the kitchen counter. Your new life starts now. Don't waste it." 2 months later, Noah Peterson was born. Holding her son for the first time, Jessica felt the last remnants of the broken woman she had been sloughed away. This tiny, perfect human was her why. He was the reason for every sacrifice, every late night, every challenge she was about to face. Her love for him was fierce and absolute, a protective fire that burned away her self-pity and forged it into pure, unadulterated ambition. Alistair was true to his word. He was a mentor, not a benefactor. While nannies he provided cared for Noah during the day, Jessica was thrown into the deep end of the world of finance and technology. Her days were a grueling regimen of study and application. She enrolled in an accelerated MBA program at the University of Washington, her nights spent devouring textbooks on market analysis, venture capital, and corporate strategy. Alistair would meet with her every evening. He didn't lecture, he challenged. He'd slide a company's financial portfolio across the table and say, "Find the weakness." He'd give her a startup's business plan and command, "Tell me why it will fail in 6 months." He was ruthless, dismantling her arguments, forcing her to think critically, to see the world not as it was, but as a complex system of assets, liabilities, and opportunities. She absorbed it all like a sponge. The part of her brain that had once meticulously organized Daniel's scripts and schedules now learned to deconstruct balance sheets and forecast market trends. She discovered she had a natural, intuitive grasp of the tech world, an ability to see the potential in fledgling ideas that others dismissed. The years passed in a whirlwind of hard work. Jessica's transformation was profound. The soft, accommodating woman who had lived in her husband's shadow was gone. In her place was a sharp, focused executive. She cut her hair into a severe, stylish bob. Her wardrobe of soft dresses was replaced by tailored power suits and elegant, understated pieces. Her voice, once gentle and hesitant, became calm, confident, and precise. She learned that in the world of high-stakes business, emotion was a liability, and results were the only language that mattered. She graduated at the top of her class. Alistair immediately put her to work, not as an employee, but as a partner. He gave her a seed fund to manage a trial by fire. Her first major investment was in a small, struggling biotech firm working on revolutionary gene sequencing technology. Everyone else saw a money pit. Jessica saw the future. She restructured their business plan, secured new patents, and within 2 years the company was acquired by a pharmaceutical giant for a staggering sum. That success was the first of many. She had a golden touch, an almost preternatural ability to identify and nurture potential. She founded her own venture capital firm under the umbrella of Finch Holdings, which she named Phoenix Innovations. The symbolism was not lost on her. She was rising from the ashes, stronger and more powerful than before. Throughout it all, Noah was her center. She was a fiercely devoted mother. Her evenings and weekends were sacrosanct, dedicated entirely to him. They built forts in the living room, sailed on the lake, and read books before bed. He was a bright, happy child, oblivious to the circumstances of his birth and the demons that drove his mother. He knew nothing of Daniel Carter. To him, Alistair, whom he called Grandpa Finch, was the only grandfather figure he'd ever had. Jessica never looked back. She never checked Daniel's social media, never watched his movies. He was a ghost, a painful memory she had locked away in a deep, cold vault. She channeled all the pain and betrayal from that night into her work, using it as fuel. Revenge was a dish best served cold, but she wasn't interested in a simple meal. She was preparing a banquet. By the time Noah was 7 years old, Jessica Peterson was no longer just a success story. She was a force. The tech and finance journals called her the Phoenix, a mysterious and brilliant investor who had come out of nowhere to dominate the Seattle venture capital scene. Her net worth was in the hundreds of millions and climbing rapidly. She had become a billionaire on paper thanks to her diverse and wildly successful portfolio. She had built her empire brick by painful brick. One rainy Tuesday morning, while reviewing a list of potential investment opportunities in the entertainment technology sector, a name caught her eye. Aura Studios, a new production company seeking a massive $50 million capital injection to launch a groundbreaking virtual reality streaming platform. She felt a jolt, a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. She instructed her assistant to pull the full dossier on the company. An hour later, the file was on her desk. She opened it, her expression unreadable. The founders of Aura Studios were listed on the first page. CEO Daniel Carter, Chief Creative Officer Tiffany Monroe. A slow, cold smile touched Jessica's lips. The ghost was back, and he was knocking on her door begging for money. For 7 years she had been forging her armor and sharpening her sword. She hadn't gone looking for the dragon. The dragon, arrogant and desperate, had come stumbling into her lair. The hunt was about to begin. The dossier on Aura Studios was a story of slow, predictable decline. After the initial success of Echoes of a City, Daniel Carter's career had fizzled. His follow-up film was a critical and commercial flop. His genius was revealed to be a one-hit wonder, propped up by a script he'd been polishing for years. He and Tiffany had become B-list celebrities, famous more for their lavish spending and red carpet appearances than for their actual work. They had burned through Daniel's movie money at an astonishing rate. Aura Studios was their last-ditch effort to reclaim relevance and solvency. The idea itself, a VR streaming platform for immersive cinematic experiences, was ambitious, but flawed. Jessica's team had already analyzed and passed on a dozen similar, better-executed proposals. Daniel's business plan was a mess of inflated projections, vague technical specs, and a fundamental misunderstanding of the market. It was a house of cards built on ego and desperation. Jessica spent the next week orchestrating a meticulous, multi-pronged intelligence operation. This wasn't just about business, it was about understanding the enemy. She tasked her firm's top analysts, people who owed their careers to her, with a special project. I want to know everything about Daniel Carter and Tiffany Monroe. She instructed her head of research, a sharp man named David Chen. Their financials, personal and corporate. I want to know every debt they hold, every loan they've taken, every credit card that's maxed out. I want to know the real value of their assets, not the inflated numbers in this proposal. I want to know who they've pitched to before us and why they were rejected. I want to know their vulnerabilities. Everything. Discreetly. The information flowed in, painting a grim picture for the golden couple. They were leveraged to the hilt. Their Hollywood mansion was mortgaged with 2 separate loans. They had borrowed money from friends who were now avoiding their calls. The $50 million investment wasn't just for the company. It was a lifeline to keep their entire glittering facade from collapsing. They hadn't been rejected by other VC firms. They hadn't even gotten a meeting. Phoenix Innovations, with its reputation for backing high-risk, high-reward tech ventures, was their first real hope. And they had no idea who was behind it. Jessica worked with the quiet, chilling precision of a master strategist. She had her legal team draft a preliminary term sheet 1 that was deliberately aggressive. It offered the capital they needed, but it demanded a controlling interest in the company, 60% of the voting shares. It included clauses that would give Phoenix Innovations the power to replace the CEO and CCO if performance milestones weren't met within the first year. It was a predator's contract designed to look like a rescue. Her second move was to control the environment. The meeting would not be in the sleek, impersonal boardroom at Phoenix headquarters. That was too formal. She wanted something that felt more intimate, more disarming. Alistair still owned a boutique investment firm in a historic downtown building, a place with old-world charm, rich mahogany leather chairs, a view of the bay. He rarely used the main conference room. It would be perfect. It had an air of old money and unshakable power. Finally, she prepared herself. For 7 years, she had avoided seeing his face. Now she studied recent photos of him. The charismatic charm was still there, but it was thinner now, strained. There were faint lines of worry around his eyes, a tightness in his smile that wasn't there before. Tiffany looked harder, her beauty maintained by expensive treatments that couldn't quite hide the brittle anxiety beneath. They looked like people clinging to the edge of a cliff by their fingernails. On the morning of the meeting, Jessica chose her armor carefully. A charcoal grey suit by a designer so exclusive it had no label. A simple silk blouse underneath. Her only jewelry was a thin, elegant watch on her wrist, a gift from Alistair after her first billion-dollar valuation. Her hair was pulled back in a severe chignon. Her makeup was minimal, professional, and cold. When she looked in the mirror, she saw no trace of the heartbroken girl in the emerald dress. She saw JP, the formidable head of Phoenix Innovations. Before leaving, she went into Noah's room. He was still sleeping, his dark hair tousled against the pillow. She kissed his forehead gently. He was the reason for all of this. Not revenge, justice, security, a future for him that no one could ever threaten. He was her true north, the quiet center of her storm. As she was driven downtown, she felt a strange calm settle over her. There was no fear, no anger, no fluttering nerves. There was only the cold, clear focus of a hunter closing in on her prey. She had spent 7 years building her fortress. Today, Daniel Carter would walk willingly through the front gate, blindfolded, and begging for a place inside. He thought he was coming to pitch his future. He had no idea he was about to be confronted with his past, a past that was now infinitely more powerful than he could ever have imagined. The trap wasn't just set. The bait was already taken. All she had to do was spring it. The conference room was exactly as Jessica had envisioned, imposing yet intimate. Sunlight streamed through the tall arched windows, illuminating the fine dust motes dancing in the air. A long, polished mahogany table reflected the grey Seattle sky like a dark mirror. Jessica sat at the head of the table, her back to the windows, a deliberate strategic choice that would force her visitors to look into the light, slightly squinting, placing them at an immediate disadvantage. Her team, David Chen, and 2 of her top legal advisors sat silently to her side, their postures relaxed but alert. Right on time, the frosted glass door opened. A receptionist showed Daniel Carter and Tiffany Monroe in. Jessica's first impression was that they looked smaller in person than they did in photographs. Daniel wore a suit that was trying too hard to be expensive, its sheen a little too bright under the office lights. His smile was wide and practiced, but his eyes darted around the room, quickly assessing its wealth and power. Tiffany poured into a tight white dress, followed him like a shadow, her own smile a brittle, painted-on slash of red. They radiated an aura of desperate ambition. "Mr. Carter, Ms. Monroe," David Chen said, rising slightly. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." He gestured to the 2 chairs at the far end of the table, directly opposite Jessica. The distance was intentional, creating a chasm of power between them. Daniel strode forward, his hand outstretched. "A pleasure to be here. We're incredibly excited about the potential for a partnership." He was looking at David, assuming him to be the senior decision-maker. Jessica remained seated, her hands steepled in front of her. She didn't offer to shake his hand. She simply watched him, her gaze cool and analytical. Her silence, and the fact that the others at the table subtly deferred to her, created a moment of awkwardness. Daniel's hand faltered and dropped to his side. His eyes finally shifted to her, the woman at the head of the table. He didn't recognize her. 7 years, a new city, a different hairstyle, the unshakable confidence of a self-made billionaire. They were the perfect disguise. To him, she was just a stern, powerful executive, the final boss he had to impress. "Let's begin," Jessica said, her voice even and devoid of any emotion. It was a voice he had never heard before. "You have 30 minutes to convince us why we should invest $50 million in a high-risk venture in an already saturated market." The cold, direct opening clearly rattled him. He had expected pleasantries, small talk. He exchanged a quick, nervous glance with Tiffany before launching into his pitch. He was a good performer. He spoke with passion, using buzzwords like synergy, paradigm shift, and next-generation storytelling. He painted a grand vision of Aura Studios becoming the Netflix of virtual reality. Tiffany chimed in periodically, with vapid, effusive comments about artistic integrity and brand potential. Jessica listened without interruption. She didn't take notes. She just watched him, her expression unreadable. Her unwavering, silent scrutiny was more unnerving than any interruption would have been. Daniel started to sweat under the collar of his shirt. He stumbled over a few of his projected user acquisition numbers. Tiffany's smile became fixed and strained. The confidence they had walked in with was visibly crumbling under the weight of Jessica's silence. When he finally finished, the room was quiet. Daniel looked at her, expectant, a desperate hope in his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," Jessica said, the formality a deliberate sting. "My team has already performed a thorough analysis of your proposal. David Chen slid a tablet across the table. "Mr. Carter, your projected revenue for year 3 is $200 million. However, based on current market penetration rates for VR hardware and the content development costs you've outlined, our models show a best-case scenario of $12 million with a net loss of no less than $30 million. He continued systematically and dispassionately to dismantle their entire business plan. He pointed out the flaws in their technology, the unrealistic marketing budget, the lack of a clear strategy for content acquisition. With each point, Daniel's face grew paler. Tiffany began fidgeting with the strap of her designer handbag. "Furthermore," David said, swiping to a new screen, "there's the matter of your corporate and personal debt." He listed their outstanding loans, the liens against their property, the maxed-out credit lines. He did it all in a flat, factual tone, but it was a public undressing of their finances. "You're not just undercapitalized," David concluded. "You're on the verge of insolvency." Daniel was speechless, his jaw slack. How could you possibly know all that? We know everything that's relevant to our investments, Mr. Carter," Jessica said, speaking for the first time since the pitch began. Her voice cut through the tense silence like a shard of ice. "We know you've been turned down by every major bank and have been unable to secure a meeting with any other VC firm of our caliber. We are, for all intents and purposes, your last resort." The room was thick with their humiliation. Tiffany looked like she was about to be sick. Daniel stared at Jessica, a mixture of fear and fury in his eyes. "So what is this?" he blustered, trying to regain some semblance of control. "You bring us in here just to tear us apart." "No," Jessica said, leaning forward slightly. The movement was small, but it commanded the entire room's attention. "We brought you in here to discuss the terms of our investment." A flicker of hope ignited in Daniel's eyes. "So, you're still interested?" "We are," Jessica confirmed, "but not in your business plan. We are interested in the intellectual property and the brand name. As such, our offer comes with conditions." She nodded to her lawyer, who slid a leather-bound document across the vast expanse of the table. It stopped just in front of Daniel. "We will provide the $50 million capital injection," Jessica stated. "In return, Phoenix Innovations takes a 60% controlling interest in Aura Studios. A new board will be appointed by us. And we will be invoking our right to replace key executives." Daniel stared at her, uncomprehending. "Replace? You mean us?" "I mean you, Mr. Carter," Jessica said, her eyes boring into his. "You will be removed as CEO. Ms. Monroe, your position as Chief Creative Officer, will also be terminated." Tiffany let out a small gasp. "This is insane. The company is our vision. It's nothing without us." Jessica's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth whatsoever. "Your vision is failing. Your company is worth nothing but its debt. We are not investing in you. We are buying your assets out of bankruptcy before it happens. You will be given a small severance package and a minority share that you can't sell for 5 years. You will walk away with just enough to pay your debts and start over. That is the offer. It is the only offer you will get." Daniel looked from the contract to Jessica's face, his mind reeling. He was trapped. It was either accept this utter humiliation or face total financial ruin. But there was something else bothering him. Something about the woman across the table. The way she watched him, the cold confidence, the almost personal nature of this surgical dismantling of his life. "Who are you?" he finally asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Why are you doing this?" This was the moment, the culmination of 7 years of pain work and planning. Jessica stood up, walking slowly around the table until she stood directly behind him, forcing him to crane his neck to look up at her. She leaned down, her voice dropping to a soft, intimate murmur that was more terrifying than any shout. "You really don't remember me, do you, Daniel?" She whispered, the sound carrying an echo of a life he had long since buried. "You stood on a stage, holding a golden statue, and you thanked your muse. You laughed while your pregnant wife walked out of the room, completely destroyed." Recognition dawned in Daniel's eyes, followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated shock. His face went white as a sheet. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Jessica stood up straight, her voice returning to its cool executive tone, now audible to everyone in the room. "My name," she said, letting each word land with devastating weight, "is Jessica Peterson." The name hung in the air, a grenade with the pin pulled. For a moment, the only sound was the frantic, panicked beat of Daniel Carter's own heart in his ears. He stared up at the woman before him, his mind struggling to reconcile the image of the powerful, ice-cold billionaire with the memory of his soft, accommodating wife. The transformation was so absolute it seemed impossible. Tiffany Monroe's reaction was more visceral. The color drained from her face, her expertly applied makeup suddenly looking like a cheap mask on a terrified mannequin. "Jessica." She breathed the name, a venomous whisper of disbelief. "It can't be." "Oh, but it is," Jessica said, her voice a silken blade. She walked back to the head of the table and sat down, a queen reclaiming her throne. The balance of power in the room had not just shifted, it had been utterly and irrevocably shattered. "I believe the last time we saw each other you were being called a muse. How has that worked out for you?" Daniel finally found his voice, a strangled, incredulous rasp. This is a joke. This is some kind of sick joke. You did all of this. This entire company. Just for revenge." Jessica let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound devoid of any humor. "Revenge, Daniel. You have to be the center of the universe to think my life for the past 7 years has been about you. You were a catalyst, nothing more. You were the fire that burned down my old life, and for that I suppose I should thank you, because I built a much better one from the ashes." She gestured around the opulent room. "This isn't about revenge. This is about business. Your company is a failing asset, and I am acquiring it for pennies on the dollar. The fact that its founder is a man who publicly humiliated me and left me homeless while I was carrying his child is merely a serendipitous bonus." The mention of the child hit Daniel like a physical blow. "His child," he repeated numbly. In his narcissism, he had conveniently erased that detail, convincing himself over the years that it was a problem that had simply vanished along with Jessica. "Yes, my son Noah," Jessica said, her voice hardening. "He's 7 years old now. He's brilliant and kind, and he is the sole heir to everything I have built, an empire you will have no part in." She then delivered the final, most devastating twist. She nodded to David, who tapped his tablet. A new document appeared on the large screen on the wall behind her. It was a page from a notebook filled with familiar handwriting, her own. "Do you recognize this?" Jessica asked. "It's from an old journal of mine, from about 8 years ago. It's a concept I was working on, an idea for an interactive storytelling platform using emergent VR technology. An idea I discussed with you in detail on many late nights while I was supporting your art." She pointed to the screen. "You see the name I gave the project, the Aura Project. You didn't just steal my life, Daniel. You stole my idea. Your one big shot at a comeback, the vision Ms. Monroe claims, is all yours, was built on a foundation you stole from the woman you threw away." The air was sucked out of Daniel's lungs. It was true. He had found her old notebook a year after she'd left, and in his desperation, he'd taken the concept and twisted it into his own. He never dreamed she would ever be in a position to call him on it. "So you see," Jessica continued, her voice dangerously calm, "this isn't just a hostile takeover. This is a reclamation. I am taking back what is mine." Tiffany, seeing her future of wealth and fame evaporating, finally cracked. "You bitch!" she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "You planned this. All of it. Plan." Jessica raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "No, I didn't plan for you to be foolish enough to run your careers and finances into the ground. I didn't plan for you to be arrogant enough to build a company on a stolen idea. I just built my fortress, and you came knocking at the gate. You did this to yourselves." She looked back at Daniel, who sat slumped in his chair, utterly defeated. All the charisma and arrogance had been stripped away, leaving behind a hollow, pathetic shell of a man. "The offer stands," Jessica said, her tone all business once again. "You will sign the documents. You will transfer control of the company and all its assets, including the intellectual property, which I am now legally reclaiming. You will take your severance and you will disappear. If you refuse, I will not only walk away, but I will also file a lawsuit for intellectual property theft that will bury you in legal fees for the rest of your life. I will personally see to it that every last one of your creditors is made aware of your fraudulent business practices. You will lose everything, the house, the cars, whatever is left. The choice is yours." There was no choice. It was surrender or annihilation. Tiffany shot a look of pure hatred at Daniel. This was his fault. He had led them here. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. "I'm done!" She spat, not looking at either of them. "I'm done with this. I'm done with you." She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her, abandoning the sinking ship. Daniel didn't even watch her go. He just stared at the contract on the table. It was his death warrant and his only salvation. His hands shaking, he reached for the pen. He didn't look at Jessica as he signed away his company, his dream, his last shred of dignity. He signed page after page, his signature, a weak, trembling scrawl. When he was finished, he pushed the document back across the table. He finally looked up at Jessica, his eyes pleading, searching for a flicker of the woman he once knew. "Jess, I'm sorry," he whispered. Jessica's expression remained unchanged, as cold and impenetrable as a glacier. "No, you're not," she said simply. "You're not sorry for what you did. You're just sorry you got caught. Now get out of my boardroom." Daniel Carter walked out of that building a broken man. The crisp Seattle air felt foreign, the city's optimistic bustle a mockery of his ruin. The severance package was just enough to be an insult, a sum that would clear his immediate debts, but leave him with virtually nothing. It was a calculated move by Jessica, ensuring he couldn't afford to be a nuisance, but would never be comfortable again. His downfall was swift and total. News of the takeover of Aura Studios hit the trade papers framed as a brilliant acquisition by the reclusive powerhouse JP of Phoenix Innovations. Daniel Carter and Tiffany Monroe were mentioned only as the exiting founders. There was no public scandal, no dramatic expose. Jessica simply erased them from their own story, a far more elegant and cutting form of revenge. Tiffany, true to her nature, had vanished. She cleaned out their joint bank accounts and was last seen on social media in Bali with a wealthy older European. She left Daniel to face the fallout alone. He was forced to sell the mansion at a loss. The cars were repossessed. The friends who had once clamored for his attention no longer answered his calls. He was a pariah, a Hollywood cautionary tale. A few weeks later, Jessica agreed to one final meeting. He had requested it, begged for it through her lawyers. She chose a neutral location, a quiet, minimalist coffee shop overlooking the water. It was a public place, a final assertion of her control. He looked haggard. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by worn jeans and a faded jacket. He looked older than his years, the weight of his failure etched onto his face. "Why did you agree to see me?" he asked, his voice rough. "Closure," Jessica replied, stirring her tea. She felt nothing looking at him. No anger, no pity, not even the ghost of love. He was just a stranger, a footnote in her life story. "And to give you this." She slid a small plain envelope across the table. He opened it. Inside was a single photograph. It was of Noah smiling brightly at his 7th birthday party, a baseball cap on backward. He had Daniel's eyes, but Jessica's determined chin. "He's my son," Daniel whispered, his voice thick with a regret that had come 7 years too late. "He is," Jessica said, "and he will never know the man who abandoned him. He will grow up knowing only strength, integrity, and love. He will have every opportunity in the world, opportunities I earned for him. I wanted you to see what you threw away. Not me. Not the money. Him." Can I ever see him?" Daniel asked the question, laced with a pathetic desperation. "No," Jessica answered, the word calm and final. "That ship sailed a long time ago. You don't get to be a father. You had your chance, and you chose a golden statue instead. This is the last time you and I will ever speak. If you ever try to contact me or my son, I will use the full weight of my resources to crush what little you have left. Are we clear?" He could only nod, his eyes locked on the photograph of the son he would never know. Jessica stood up, placed a few bills on the table for the coffee, and walked out without a backward glance. As she stepped out into the bright afternoon, a sense of profound peace settled over her. It was finally completely over. The ghost was exorcised. The last chain to her past had been broken. Her life now was full. She was a mother, a CEO, a titan of industry. She had built an empire not for revenge, but for her son. She had transformed her greatest pain into her greatest strength. Daniel Carter hadn't destroyed her. He had liberated her. He had forced her to become the woman she was always meant to be. That evening she arrived home to find Noah and Alistair Finch in a heated game of chess in the living room. Noah, his face scrunched up in concentration, looked up as she entered. "Mom, I almost have him," he shouted with glee. Alistair looked at Jessica over the top of his reading glasses. a warm, proud smile on his face. Jessica knelt by her son, wrapping her arms around him and kissing the top of his head. He smelled of fresh air and childhood. This was her world. This was her victory. Not the boardroom, not the billions. This moment right here, she was home, strong, whole, and finally truly free. And so Jessica Peterson's story comes to a close. It's a powerful reminder that the most devastating betrayals can sometimes become the catalysts for our most incredible transformations. She proved that your past does not have to define your future, and that the ultimate revenge isn't destruction, but building a life so magnificent that those who wronged you become an irrelevant footnote. Her journey from a humiliated pregnant wife to a billionaire powerhouse is a testament to the unbreakable strength of a mother's love and the fierce power of a woman who decides to reclaim her own narrative. What did you think of Jessica's incredible story of justice and rebirth? Do you believe she did the right thing? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear a story of resilience, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable real-life dramas. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update from us. Thanks for listening.